Hi, everyone. Thank you for attending the keynote session. This is the session that I was looking forward to. My name is Banu Ermeci. I'm a professor at Carleton University, and our keynote speaker is Charles Fishman. Before we start, I would like to do our land acknowledgement. Although this event is taking place virtually, we wish to acknowledge the land on which Actual Media, Water Canada's parent company, operates. Actual Media's head office is located in Toronto. For thousands of years, it has been the traditional land of the Huron-Wendat, the Seneca, and most recently, the Mississaugas of the Credit River. Today, while we are meeting virtually, Toronto is still home to many Indigenous people from across Turtle Island, and we're grateful to have the opportunity to work on this land. So Charles is very famous. He has a very well-known book. He is a renowned investigative and explanatory journalist. He's a three-time winner of the prestigious Gerald Loeb Award for Distinguished Business and Financial Journalism. Charles is also the author of The Big Thirst, The Secret Life and Turbulent Future of Water. And I'm expecting he's going to provide us the big picture, and I'm really looking forward to his talk. Charles.
Thank you very much, Professor Ermeci. And I'm going to start by sharing my screen. I am going to start with a story. A few years ago, I was giving a talk in California, and when I was done, a young man came up to me and he said, "Can I tell you a water story?" And I said, "Absolutely, that's all I deal in is water stories. Please tell me a water story." And he said, "Until recently, I was an FA-18 fighter pilot flying off the US aircraft carrier, the Kitty Hawk. The Kitty Hawk was the last diesel fuel powered aircraft carrier in the US Navy fleet. What that means is you have to burn diesel fuel to desalinate water. You have to burn fuel to make water every day. Kitty Hawk, 5,000 crew members. So you were burning enough fuel to desalinate enough water every day for 5,000 people, plus all the operations of the aircraft carrier. Now, this young man said to me, one of our jobs as the pilot of an F-18 was to keep the plane clean. Sea air, salt water, and high performance jet aircraft don't get along. One of the jobs is to wash the plane down with fresh water every week. But of course, that took a lot of water. So the captain of the Kitty Hawk at that time, a guy named Todd Zekin, would keep an eye on the radar. And every time there was a line of squalls within 25 miles or so, he would scramble all 80 F-18s off the deck of the aircraft carrier, and they were instructed to fly through the rain squall, flaps down, landing gear down, nature zone, fly through, jet plane, rinse off, like an airborne car wash. And I was so captivated by this story, I actually tracked Captain Zekin down to make sure it was true. Captain Zekin understood something that is all too rare. He understood water scarcity. He understood the environment and the environment he was operating in, and the importance of using all kinds of water resources and water at hand in smart and creative ways. He understood the value of fresh water, and he also understood the impact he could have on the attitudes of his crew members by underscoring how precious fresh water was by having his jet aircraft fly off and get washed in the rain. I think right now we are all living on the equivalent of that aircraft carrier, of the USS Kitty Hawk. It's just that most of us in both the developed world and the developing world are doing it without the smart, determined imagination of a guy like Captain Todd Zekin. But what made such an impression on me about that story is that if we are going to have the water future we all want, which is the same thing as saying if we're going to have the future we want. Sorry, I didn't change my slide. Hang on one second. There's the kitty hawk right there. Sorry, I'm not used to moving the slides along. If we're going to have the future we want, the water future equals the future we want, we are going to need exactly that appreciation of water, awareness of water, and that creativity as we move forward. We are going to need whole new ways of thinking about water and communicating about it. And the survival of the world we live in depends on that. I am really glad to be with you all today. I've enjoyed yesterday's sessions, and this morning's session, and enjoyed may be the wrong way of putting it, given some of the topics, but I was illuminated by yesterday's sessions and this morning's sessions on micropollutants. And I'm sorry we're not all in Ottawa. I love to travel to Canada. And I want to do a land acknowledgement as well. I confess, in the United States, we aren't that good at thinking about this or doing it. This is the first time I've ever done it. And I actually spent an hour yesterday reading about the original indigenous people who lived in Washington, D.C. And so I want to acknowledge from here in Washington that I am speaking from the land that was originally occupied by the Nacotchtank peoples. And I am grateful for the opportunity to be here. I am not a water scientist. I am not a hydrologist, a geologist, a chemist, or an engineer. I am a journalist. A few years ago, probably at this point, 11 or 12 years ago, in fact, my family and I were traveling. We lived then in Philadelphia, and we used to drive down and see my parents in Miami at Christmas and take our kids. And we drove one Christmas in the minivan, whole gang in the minivan, from Philly to Miami. And when we arrived, we were a little wiped out. We checked into a hotel and stepped into our hotel room. And in the hotel room was a bottle of Fiji water. And we had never seen, my wife and I had never seen Fiji water. That bottle of Fiji water, I'm going to hold this up for the camera, had this little tag around its neck. That tag says, "This bottle of Fiji water is here for your drinking pleasure. If you drink it, $7 will be added to your hotel bill." And my wife had the bottle of Fiji water open and half consumed before the door even swung closed. I did not say anything about the cost of the Fiji water, but I did say, "Honey, do you think the water in that Fiji water bottle actually comes to Miami, Florida from the island nation of Fiji?" And where exactly is Fiji anyway? I threw the empty Fiji water bottle in my suitcase. We had, in fact, paid $7 for it. I wasn't going to let it go. And when I got back to my desk, I discovered something remarkable. At that time in Fiji, 53% of the people in Fiji did not have access to clean, safe drinking water. So you could walk into a convenience store, a Walgreens, a Safeway, a grocery store, anywhere in America. You could walk into a hotel room and there was clean, safe drinking water from Fiji, but more than half the people in Fiji didn't have access to exactly that same product. That seemed completely crazy. That is sort of capitalism and the global economy kind of run amok. And I persuaded the magazine I worked for then, Fast Company magazine, to send me to Fiji to see where Fiji water came from. And I wrote a story about bottled water, which ended up leading to a book about water. The book is called The Big Thirst. I'll show you the cover of The Big Thirst in a minute. And I spent to write the book. The book's not about bottled water. It's about our experience of water. It's really a story of people who are confronting their water problems and people who are failing to confront their water problems. So I traveled the whole world. I spent a month in Australia at a time when Australia was having a drought that covered the entire nation. I spent a month in Las Vegas to try and understand how they manage water. And as you can see here, I spent a month in India and I did the water walk in India. That's me carrying water on top of my head. And I have spent the last 10 years since the book came out trying to understand how we do and do not confront water problems and what happens along the way. Here's what I've concluded is so clear at this moment. I think 2021 is the most important moment in the life of water and people in a long time. Perhaps the most important moment in a century since we learned how to clean water and make it reliably safe at the start of the 20th century. Water, because of climate change, and almost every impact of climate change is water related, water is having a moment at center stage. The biggest complaint for most water people most of the time is that no one pays adequate attention to water. Right now, people are paying attention to water. Water problems are popping up in all kinds of new and, needless to say, unwelcome places. Companies and governments are paying attention to water in ways they never have before. And even more remarkable, the public is paying attention to water and water issues, in part because of things like what happened in Texas this winter when half a dozen huge cities, including Houston, literally turned off their water utilities because there was no electricity to run them. So the question is, what are we in the world of water? And I include myself as a kind of ex officio member of the water community. What are we in the water community going to do with this moment at center stage? What are we going to do with the attention? And I think the answer is really clear. We have a responsibility to fix water, not fix water problems for next month or next year. We need to fix water for the future. We need to take the opportunity that all of this attention is giving us and deploy all of the ideas that we've been cooking for 20 years. We need to fix water for the next 100 years, as our predecessors did 100 years ago, setting up the engineering and the systems that we've relied on since. I want to tell you a couple of stories about what the smart water future looks like at a granular level, but I like to start with some numbers, and I want to start in the world of bottled water. In the United States today, Americans buy 2.1 billion bottles of water every week. That is 7 bottles of water for every man, woman, and child in the country every single week. It is the equivalent of every one of us drinking a bottle of bottled water every day. If you didn't have your 7 last week, someone else had 14. Of those 2.1 billion bottles of water, by the way, only 29% get recycled in the US. That means Americans are throwing away 1.5 billion bottles of water. In Canada, per person, you only purchase and drink 43% as much bottled water as Americans do. That means by May 23rd, a typical American has had as much bottled water as a typical Canadian will drink in an entire year. In fact, Canada, maybe this is something to be proud of, on a per capita basis, per capita consumption of bottled water, Canada is not in the top 20 nations in the world. In the US, we spend $35 billion a year just buying bottled water. What's $35 billion? Well, in the US, we only spend $65 billion maintaining and rehabilitating our water system. $35 billion on bottled water, $65 billion on the entire water system that undergirds the American economy. So people often say, you know, water problems are serious, but there's just no money to tackle them. And I say, not only is there money to fix water problems, we're already spending it on water, just one crushable plastic bottle at a time. One of the things that was so clear in my travels around the world is that the cost of bad water is extraordinary. Before the pandemic, in India, as an example, India was spending 2% of its gross domestic product just treating diarrhea just from bad water, 2% of GDP. In India, 2% of GDP is $57 billion a year. India is spending pre-pandemic, $1 billion a week just treating diarrhea from bad water. 70% of the people admitted to a hospital in India before the COVID pandemic, 70% of the people admitted to an Indian hospital had a waterborne disease. Today, 30% of the people in the world rely on water every day that was carried on someone's head to get to them. That is really an indictment of the way we've organized our water systems. Perhaps my favorite water stat has to do with us as creatures, as human beings. Human beings, of course, are mostly water. Men, it turns out, on average, are 60% water. Women, it turns out, on average, are 55% water. So women are literally more substantive than men, something women have always known. The big news, the good news about water is as follows. In the US, in the United States, as a country, we use less water today in 2021 than we did in 1970. Not less water per capita or less water per dollar of GDP. We use less water total. We've added 120 million people and we use less water than we did 40 years ago. In the US, water use peaked in 1980. We are down 25% since then, and the GDP of the US is up 100% since then. What that means is that every gallon of water we use today in the United States does 3 times the work that a gallon of water did in 1980. Use of water by farmers in the US has use of water by farmers in the US also peaked in 1980. Farm use of water is down 20% since then, and harvests are up 70%. Every gallon of water used by an American farmer today grows twice as much food as a gallon of water grew in 1980. So dramatic progress clearly is possible. At home in the US, these are the statistics that are on the screen. At home in the United States today, we use 83 gallons of water per person. That's down from 100 gallons per person per day since 2005. That's pretty dramatic. We've added 25 million new Americans since 2005. And again, the total amount of water we are using is less and dramatically less per person. At home in Canada, a typical Canadian uses 59 gallons of water per person per day. That number's from 2017, the most recent data I could find from Stat Canada, a place I became very familiar with. So a typical American is using 83 gallons of water per day. Typical Canadian today, 59 gallons of water a day. And even that for Canadians is down from 66 gallons in 2011. In just 6 years, you all cut per person water use by 10%. That's pretty impressive. A family of 4 Canadians uses less water than a family of 3 Americans. My son heard that statistic and immediately wanted to know why. What are the Canadians doing differently? And I said, they aren't watering their lawns with the incredible insanity that Americans do. So to me, those figures should provide us with a sense of optimism. I don't think most Americans or most American farmers feel like we have dried out their lives. That progress is the result of smart appliances, education, awareness, and frankly, to some degree, it's the result of pricing water differently. So what does smart water look like? Let me tell you 3 quick stories. Let's go first to Las Vegas. Las Vegas, it turns out, is the driest city for which the National Weather Service tracks daily precipitation of the 280 largest cities in America. Las Vegas is number 280 in annual precipitation. But when you show up in Las Vegas, it looks like this, what's on the screen. That's the fountain in front of the Bellagio. There is water being splashed around everywhere in the city. If you start at the south end of the Las Vegas Strip, the first big casino you come to is called Mandalay Bay. You walk into Mandalay Bay flanked by 25-foot high waterfalls. Inside the casino is a 1.6 million gallon aquarium filled with sharks. One block up is the casino called New York, New York. It's a recreation of New York Harbor outside, complete with water and fireboats jetting the water into the air, the Statue of Liberty in miniature. Next to New York, New York is this casino on screen, the Bellagio, which has an 8.5-acre lake in front of it and was until recently the largest fountain in the world. There's one in Abu Dhabi, I think now, that's larger by the same company. This fountain, the Bellagio fountain, has 22 million gallons of water in it. And at any given moment when the fountain is running, as in this picture, 17,000 gallons of water are floating in the air. Inside the Bellagio, also an aquarium, a little different kind of aquarium, a 2 million gallon tank of water for Cirque du Soleil acrobats for the show they do every night called eau, the French word for water. Next door to the Bellagio is the Mirage. Out in front of the Mirage is a tropical lagoon with a volcano in the middle of it. Inside the Mirage, a 2.5 million gallon aquarium filled with 8 Atlantic bottlenose dolphins. So right there on the strip in Las Vegas, you have sharks living at one end of the strip and Atlantic bottlenose dolphins living at the other end. So the popular view is that the obsession in Las Vegas is money or gambling or sin or sex, but in fact, the real obsession is water. They invented a whole new attitude about water, which I think of as ostentatious water. Let's show how much water we can splash around. Here's the thing about Las Vegas and the Las Vegas metro area. The amount of water that Las Vegas is allocated from Lake Mead, which is its only source of water, was set back in 1935 when the population of Las Vegas was 15,000. Today, the population is 2.6 million, but they don't get a single gallon of additional water. So how do they do that? How do they manage a city, a metropolis, with all of this ostentatious water on the same allocation they got almost 100 years ago? Here's how they do it. In 1989, Las Vegas hired a legendary woman, some of you may know, named Patricia Mulroy, and they essentially named her Water Czar. And Patricia Mulroy early on looked at the available water and the practices of water use in Las Vegas. And she came to this conclusion. We're gonna strangle. We're gonna end up suffocating the growth of this city because we aren't using water smartly and we aren't aware of what we're trying to do and how much water we have available. And so over 30 years, gradually but relentlessly, with incredible sort of bureaucratic imagination and also great communication skills, she completely transformed the water culture of Las Vegas. In 2021, it is illegal in Las Vegas to water your lawn except on the days that are specified. It is illegal to let water you're using to water the lawn hit a paved surface of any kind, a sidewalk, a driveway, a street. It is illegal not to have a hose nozzle that has a trigger, an automatic cutoff. It is illegal to empty your pool or your hot tub into anything but the sanitary sewer so the water can be recovered. And Las Vegas actually has a squad of 45 water police officers who patrol looking for violations of the water rules and writing citations. Every golf course in Las Vegas, there are about 43, has a water budget, and the water management agency reduces the budget by 5% a year to force the golf courses to use water more and more smartly. Las Vegas will pay homeowners $40,000 an acre to remove grass and replace it with desert landscaping, and they will pay commercial operations and golf courses the same $40,000 an acre to remove that water-hungry turf. Since the year 2000, it's been illegal to build a house in Las Vegas that has a front lawn. front lawns aren't, lawns of any kind aren't native to Las Vegas, and you can't run a water smart city by trying to grow grass everywhere. So all of the growth since 2000 in residential construction has been without front lawns. And the big thing that Las Vegas has learned to do and has put in place is that they recycle every gallon of water that hits a drain anywhere in the city. They recycle, they clean, recycle, and reuse 94% of the water that is provided in Las Vegas. They return it to Lake Mead. They take their water from Lake Mead and they return it to Lake Mead, and they get a gallon of credit for every gallon of clean water that they return to Lake Mead. So they keep using the same water, at least in terms of the water budget. And just as interesting, the water they return to Lake Mead is actually cleaner than the water they withdraw from Lake Mead. They've not only changed their water use patterns, they've changed the attitude about water across the entire metro region. That, to me, is an example of what water smart management looks like and a water smart city looks like. I think despite splashing the water everywhere on the Las Vegas Strip for tourists, I think Las Vegas may be the most water smart city overall in the United States. Between 2000 and 2020, Las Vegas doubled in population. Excuse me. It went from 1.3 million people to 2.6 million people. But Las Vegas today uses only exactly as much water as it did in 2000. That's how much impact all that work has had. Excuse me. Let's go next to Dearborn, Michigan, and look at the Ford company, Ford Motors. Ford Motors makes 16,400 new cars a day. They make a new car every 5 seconds. Ford has factories and manufacturing plants of all kinds around the world, 62 manufacturing facilities. Water is a kind of surprising hidden ingredient in the manufacture of cars. Back in 2000, Ford did an analysis and discovered that each car it made required 2,235 gallons of water to make. Each car, real water, not water used to generate electricity or water buried deep in the chemical manufacturing process. Each car required 2,235 gallons of water. And the then CEO of Ford, Bill Ford, the great grandson of Henry Ford, said, that is simply not sustainable. That's too much water. He challenged Ford to cut the water required to make one car by a third over 10 years. And he handed that job to a guy named Andy Hobbs, Ford's vice president of sustainability. Again, a real person. Andy Hobbs did a couple things. The first thing he did was ask every Ford facility around the world to measure its water use by month and report to headquarters how much water they were using. It was incredible bureaucratic rebellion. People didn't want to measure the water use. They didn't want to report it. And in more than half the facilities, Ford had no water meters. There was no way of discovering how much water a facility was using. Over time, the big thing that Andy Hobbs first discovered was that 9% of the water Ford used worldwide was being used by leaking fire protection systems, sprinkler systems, and holding tanks used in case there was a fire. Those sprinkler systems and holding tanks leaked every day, 9% of the water Ford used. And why did they leak that water? Because, and why didn't anybody care or pay attention? You know, in a Ford car factory, there are dozens and dozens of $30 million robots, and on the list of things that needs to be repaired, you repair the car manufacturing robots first, and you twist the wrench on the leaking water pipes for water that probably costs Ford nothing or almost nothing last. And on that list of things that need to be repaired, it's quite likely that the Ford maintenance staff only ever gets to the top 10, and then there's a new top 10. The first thing Ford did was measure, and then they turned off all of that water leakage. They did 100 other things, including reformulating the paint used on every Ford car so that they could cut out a whole cycle of preparation and then baking of the cars, which uses enormous quantities of water. They not only cut the amount of water a car takes to manufacture by a third in 10 years. At the end of that period, Bill Ford, the CEO, said, that was so effective. This is so important to us in terms of the communities we operate in and our ability to be a good citizen and to operate. We're going to do it again. I want you to cut the amount of water used to make a car one more time by a third, and I want you to do it in 5 years instead of 10 years. And you know what? They did exactly the same thing. They doubled the amount of savings and they cut the time in half. They went from using 2,235 gallons of water per car to using 1,004 gallons of water per car. They cut the amount of water by more than half. What that means is that the water that used to produce 100 cars at Ford now produces 347 cars. Again, that to me is whatever you think about the world of manufacturing and vehicles, and Ford has already committed to producing an all-electric fleet on a pretty short time horizon, that we need that kind of participation and imagination from an industrial force like Ford. And by the way, Andy Hobbs now spends a lot of time teaching people in other industries how Ford did what it did, not without a lot of internal tumult. Finally, let's visit Orlando, Florida, a place I lived for 9 years. Orlando sits in the middle of Orange County, Florida. And way back in 1986, the planners in Orange County, Florida, did something pretty similar to what Patricia Mulroy did. Completely different environment. Every square foot of land in Florida receives 48 inches of rain a year, average annual rainfall 4 feet compared to 6 inches in Las Vegas. But they looked at the curves of the growth of Orange County, which was going like this, and the water availability, which was trending down. All the big cities in Florida tap an aquifer in order to provide water. None of them collect rainwater and use it. They collect the rainwater and dump it in the ocean. So in 1986, they saw that their water use and their growth were completely unsustainable. And the Orange County Commission did 2 really interesting things. They built a water recycling plant that would take water up to purple pipe level so that that water could be used for outdoor irrigation, lawn watering, commercial irrigation, washing cars, those kinds of things. And then they passed an ordinance requiring all new construction in Orange County to use the purple pipe system. Everybody who existed already in Orange County in 1986, every nursery, every subdivision, every business was grandfathered in. All new construction had to include purple pipe for outdoor water use. And as part of that ordinance, they made it illegal to use potable drinking water outdoors at any part of the county that wasn't grandfathered. You had to use the purple pipe water for any outdoor water use. What's happened in the last 30 years is as follows. Again, the population of Orange County has doubled in that time. The amount of potable water they use has actually gone down just a little bit. They now provide as much recycled water every day to their community as they provide potable water. And on many days of the year, they have excess recycled water, which they then return to the aquifer from which they are withdrawing potable water. So they have completely changed their water use profile. They've also changed the understanding and the attitude about water. They have raised a whole generation. Let's be honest, 1986 is really 35 years ago. They've raised a generation that itself now has children that understand that watering your lawn and your azaleas, washing your car with purified drinking water is simply crazy and unnecessary. So what connects Todd Zekin, the captain of the Kitty Hawk, Patricia Mulroy, the just recently retired water czar from Las Vegas, the county commission of Orange County, and Bill Ford and Andy Hobbs at Ford Motors? I think three things connect them. Most importantly, all of them saw their water situation clearly. They did not cover their eyes to the reality, and they didn't engage in wishful thinking because they knew that water problems don't respond to wishful thinking. The second thing that they did, 3 out of the 4, we could put the captain of the Kitty Hawk aside for a moment, 3 out of the 4 of them realized that there wasn't a crisis at the moment they started thinking about this, at Ford, at Las Vegas, at Orange County, Florida, but the crisis was coming. They took steps that didn't have an instantaneous impact on their operations, that didn't change water use in a month or a year, but 5 years down the line and 10 years down the line, those changes changed everything about the way water was used. In fact, Ford operates factories in northern Mexico in water scarce areas that would have had to shut down if those factories hadn't moved to internal water recycling as part of Bill Ford's effort to be a more water smart company. So all 3 places, Las Vegas, Ford, and Orlando, Florida, took actions that really embedded the idea of water sustainability and in some ways economic sustainability in those places. They gave themselves time, but they understood that they needed to use that time. And the big thing that I think all 4 of those people did, which is so relevant to us today, is that they didn't see a problem and imagine that it was someone else's responsibility to solve it. They saw a problem. They stepped outside their normal lines of authority. This is even true of Patricia Mulroy in Las Vegas, who literally reshaped the entire future of development in that metro area. They stepped outside their normal lines of responsibility. They grabbed hold of a problem and they worked on it until they had found a way of solving it and persuaded people to come along with them. We all, as a community, as a water community, I think we have an enormous task ahead of us. I don't even think that's an opinion. It's very clear we have an enormous task ahead of us. It may be the biggest and most important undertaking humanity has ever tackled, how to wrangle climate change and all of the water associated problems with it. I'm optimistic we can do it, and here's why. My most recent book was a book about going to the moon, called One Giant Leap. This is a picture of John Kennedy giving a legendary speech about going to the moon. Going to the moon was unquestionably the hardest thing at that time that humans had ever done outside of war. It was the single greatest scientific and engineering achievement. On May 25th, 1961, when President Kennedy exhorted Americans and the world to go to the moon, by 1969, that task was literally impossible. There were no rockets that could fly to the moon. There were no spacesuits that astronauts could wear once they arrived at the moon. We didn't know anything about space food. There was no computer small enough and powerful enough to put on those spaceships to guide them to the moon. We literally had no idea how to do what was necessary to get us to the moon. 8 years later, Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin are bouncing around, having flown to the moon in their spaceship with their onboard spaceship computers, wearing their spacesuits. And a couple of years after that first landing, NASA flew a General Motors car, electric car, to the moon, and the astronauts got to drive around the moon on the last 3 missions. To fly to the moon, NASA had to solve 10,000 problems, and it didn't even know what 5,000 of those problems were until it tackled the first 5,000. NASA created what I think of as a culture of innovation on a deadline. Going to the moon in 8 years required innovation on a deadline. They looked everywhere for good ideas, for solutions to those 10,000 problems. The spacesuits are a great example. The spacesuits that Apollo astronauts wore were high-tech marvels, 21 layers of fabric. Imagine trying to function just putting on 21 t-shirts. 21 layers of fabric, strong enough to stop a micrometeorite, but flexible enough to allow Armstrong and Aldrin to do what they needed to do on the moon. Those spacesuits were the work of Playtex, the bra and girdle company, which sold itself to NASA literally by saying, we have some experience with garments that need to be both form-fitting and flexible. Often during the effort to get to the moon, the innovation stepped out in front of our ability to make it. The spacesuits are a great example. Those high-tech spacesuits were hand sewn. This to me is the perfect example of what going to the moon is like. This is a Playtex seamstress using a black Singer sewing machine to hand sew a spacesuit, and there behind her are lined up the spacesuits. What about those computers we needed to fly to the moon? NASA was the first organization anywhere in the world to use computer chips. You can buy a greeting card that will play happy birthday with a computer chip, but NASA transformed the world of computers. The software for the computers that flew the astronauts to the moon, the software for the computers that were literally on the Apollo spaceships, that software was hardwired. There were no small disk drives at that time. There were no small memory chips. There was no way of wiring the software in an automated way. And so just like this woman at Playtex is sewing the spacesuits by hand, the computer software was hand woven one wire at a time. It took 8 weeks to weave by hand each wire for an Apollo spaceflight computer, and each wire had to be perfect. If it wasn't, then the software didn't work. So when JFK said, let's go to the moon, it was impossible. But the mission itself, the reach, the goal, fired the imaginations of Americans and of people and communities around the world. We like to be rallied to the cause. We like to be asked to do something that is impossible and then prove that it is, in fact, possible. Going to the moon inspired people every day along the way. And I think we need to use that as the perfect inspirational lesson for the problems we face today. Based on my time traveling the world, looking at water problems and looking at people either tackling them or failing to tackle them, and based on what's happened in the last 10 years, in which climate change has finally come to a position of prominence in our daily conversation, I think we need 3 things going forward. We need 3 things from us as the water community. First, we need a sense of urgency. This 2021 may turn out to be the most important year in the battle against climate change in the following way. We've got government awareness, we've got corporate awareness, we've got, the ESG movement, we've got popular awareness, we've got the American government back in the game, and we still have time to change the course of what's going to happen. We need to use that time, and that requires a sense of urgency. Second, everywhere I went, everywhere you look around the world, frontline people are tackling their water problems. That's what they did at Ford. That's what I encountered in the poorest communities, the slum communities in Delhi, where people got fed up being treated like second-class citizens and tackled their own water problems. They're doing it with energy, with imagination, with determination. We need to harness that energy and imagination, and we need to make sure that solutions get shared widely. Something that works in the poor neighborhoods of Delhi might well work in Toronto or Baltimore or Austin, adapted the right way. I like to say there are only about 29 real water problems in the world, and we know how to solve all of them. We just need to make sure we share that knowledge. Tackling water problems is going to be challenging and demanding, but it's also big, important, exciting work. It's not like making a new app to play solitaire on your iPhone. It's about changing the world and helping save the world. So in addition to making sure we communicate the smart solutions to anybody who might be able to take advantage of them, we also need to woo in a whole new generation of smart, engaged young people. Engineers and scientists, yes, but also sociologists, people interested in politics and bureaucracy and management, because this is, like going to the moon, tackling water problems, tackling climate change is an all-in problem. And we need the energy, the insight, and the fresh perspective of young people. During that first moon landing, the average age of people sitting at consoles in mission control in 1969 was 28, which means that those people were still in college when John Kennedy said, let's go to the moon. We need water to become a hip, cool, exciting, and impactful place for people to come to work. And finally, we need new ways of talking about water. What is so clear from my experience is that you can get the problem right, you can understand and analyze the problem well, you can get yourself a roster of good solutions, you can even pick the right solution. But if you don't explain the problem and the solutions well, if you don't bring the community along with you, if you can't tell the story well, you aren't going to get to do the solution. Because water isn't packed with politics, but it is packed with emotions. And we need to acknowledge that and make sure that our storytelling is imaginative and compelling and truthful. When you spend time like I got to for 4 years, understanding what it took to get to the moon, you can't help but be optimistic about what we face now. Just as in the 1960s, we have all the smart, energetic, determined people we need to solve the problems at hand. You are those people. There's no one else, and we are as capable, at least as capable, as our forebears in the 1960s. And I think that's the best thing we can do with the inspiration that I came away from having been immersed in the 1960s for 4 years. We need to not go to the moon, but fix the world we live in now. It is so clear to me that we can tackle the hardest problems we face. We have the talent and the imagination. We don't always have the leadership, but we can provide our own leadership, just as Todd Zekin and Pat Mulroy and Bill Ford and the Board of County Commissioners in Orange County did. We know we actually have a leg up. We actually know how to tackle climate change. We know how to tackle almost all the urgent water problems we're going to face. We didn't have any idea how to go to the moon. So given what our forebears were capable of accomplishing between 1961 and 1969, I think it's worth us saying to ourselves, what could we get done by 2030, that same period of time, that will help us tackle what's in front of us and leave the world we want to leave for the folks who will be around 100 years from now, and hopefully be grateful in the way that we are for the work that was done for us 100 years ago. I am confident that we can do what we need to do. All right, it's been a pleasure, and I hope there are some questions. I think we're going to do questions by having someone ask me the questions. That's the cover of One Giant Leap, and here on the way out, that's Charles Fishman floating in zero gravity on a zero gravity flight with my notebook and my pen floating in front of me as well.
It looks like fun, definitely.
It is great fun.
And thank you for that excellent and inspirational presentation, Charles. I saw that you compared the US water consumption rates to Canadian water consumption rates. And in Canada, you know, we're very nice people, we're very kind, we're very polite, but unfortunately we use a lot of water as well. And we're number 2, in fact, after US in terms of water
per
use
capita,
per person.
per capita.
And if you compare those numbers to France, I mean, they are in Europe, it's a developed country, and they only use 1/3 of the water that we use. And
But that is, to be fair, in part a function of development, right? New York City, the per capita use of water in New York City is less than the per capita use of water in Florida, just because a city community is a much easier community to use water efficiently in. So I vote for progress. We're at 83 and we used to be at 100. You guys are at 59 and you used to be at 66. That's going in the right direction.
Okay, so we have some excellent questions for you, Charles, and we have 10 minutes, so let's go over them. The first question, although 2.1 billion bottles of water are consumed by Americans, much of it is defensive spending because some communities, particularly low-income communities, do not trust their local governments to supply clean, safe drinking water. This creates even more water-burdened households. What role can governments play in building trust and therefore unlock all the co-benefits that may result?
Okay, well, that is a great question. I think you have to draw a distinction that the person who asked the question did draw, which is most communities in America have clean, safe drinking water. Flint is a vivid example of the contrary. There are certainly indigenous and native communities, especially out west and in Alaska, that struggle with inadequate water systems and haven't had the resources to put those in place. But 96 or 97% of Americans have access to clean, safe drinking water every single day. Their toilets have access to clean, safe drinking water every day. So part of that is a communications problem. And I think it is really incumbent on us, people in the water community, to be clear and to sort of be quiet but determined mythbusters. And it is important for those communities to do the same thing. Water utilities like to be hidden. They like to be silent and invisible. And going forward, they're not going to be able to be silent and invisible. And one of the things they're going to have to talk about is we've got a resilient, adaptable, reliable system right here, and you should depend on it. And if you have questions about it, you should ask us. The bottled water you're buying, unless you live in a place like Flint, the bottled water you're buying is not actually as closely regulated and as guaranteed safe as what comes out of your tap. You're wasting your money. And so I think that should be part of the larger conversation that we start to have with people about water. One of the places that communicates really effectively about water, if people are looking for a kind of a case study, is Washington, D.C., which has really transformed the city residents' attitude about water in the last 20 years, starting with a lead crisis here. And they have built trust, but it takes time and it takes commitment and it takes imagination.
Thank you. Did the Flint crisis change the way water is managed in US, or was it just a news blip that the public shrugged off?
I think the Flint crisis is the warning we all need to take at this meeting and in the wider world. Guess what? Only half the houses in Flint that have a lead water connection, a lead service line, have had that service line swapped out, and we are 6 years downstream. We're talking about 20,000, 25,000 homes, 11 or 12,000 of them have had their service lines swapped out in 6 years. So it was a crisis for 6 months, and now it's just the problem of the people who live in Flint. If that were a wealthy neighborhood in Coral Gables, Florida, or Palo Alto, California, or Bloomfield Hills, Michigan, it wouldn't have taken 6 months. And so I think it's a reminder that low-income communities, socioeconomically challenged communities, communities with people of color and minorities and immigrants, even when we all agree that they are being treated unjustly and that the system is not working for them, that the system is dangerous, that it's putting their children at risk, we sometimes don't then step in and solve the problem. And so that, if you want a moment of pessimism instead of optimism, all of the publicity, all of the attention, all of the complete 100% consensus that what happened in Flint was unjust, a disaster, incompetence, and yet here we are years later and it's not fixed. That's a reminder that we can't be complacent, that just giving problems attention doesn't necessarily get them solved.
Thank you. If some green space, such as lawns, are now illegal in Las Vegas, what strategies is the city using to avoid urban heat island effect?
That's a good question. I don't think that Las Vegas, that the water managers worry that much about the urban heat island effect compared to water consumption there. That's a desert. There's going to be a heat island effect, literally whether there's a casino or not. They are really focused on managing water demand because Lake Mead, Lake Mead has this. Lake Mead's the largest reservoir in North America, 100 miles long, and it has this bathtub ring. It's down 100 feet from what used to be not its high, but its typical. And so the communities out west, if you look at the U.S. drought map, both the U.S. and Canada, many of you may know this, produce drought maps every week that show what parts of the U.S. and what parts of Canada are dry. The entire Western United States is blood red already. It was in May. There isn't I guess the last drought map was last Thursday for the last week in May. Already maroon colored, meaning high alert, really dry, really bad. And so those communities are, I think heat island effects are a more significant issue in places that aren't in the desert, but the Western cities right now are looking, even a place like Las Vegas, which has managed to cut per person water use in half in 20 years, is facing a crisis because they're worried about supply. So I don't think that community is that worried about that. There isn't normally grass or wildlands or forest in Las Vegas. So that's not a significant water management issue for them.
Okay, so this is a fun question. Can you share with us the most surprising audience you have presented to on this topic?
Oh my goodness, what a great question.
We are a passionate group here, but
I've certainly given 100 water talks in my life. What's the most surprising group? I guess maybe this is going to be unsatisfying, but I spoke to the American Society of Landscape Architects, 4,000 people in one room in Phoenix, Arizona. It was an interesting place to talk. And I spoke to the golf course managers, a sort of much smaller version of the same thing. And both of those were certainly 5 years ago. And I guess I would classify them as surprising because they actually want to know how to do better. And they appreciate that, a golf course is an easy target. Like, why do we even have golf courses? Certainly, why do we have golf courses in Las Vegas? That's crazy. But one thing that's clear is that you're not going to get Americans, you're not going to get Canadians on board with tackling climate change by telling them they're going to have to turn off their air conditioning in August and give up their recreation and just sit home and ponder their recycling bin. We're going to have to find ways of showing people how to live a good, rich, exciting life while also reducing water use. We can do that. And so I guess I was delighted that people like that would turn to someone like me. I'm not a water expert at all. I'm a water storyteller. And I think The most, I guess, for me, one of the most important things to pass along to you all is the storytelling really matters. If you take one thing out of my talk, it is you really need to talk to people in a way that they can appreciate, and then you need to listen to what you hear back and fold that into your conversation. I think Canadians are actually much better at doing that than Americans are. That's why it's taken you, the better part of a year and a half to talk about creating a national, a Canada Water Agency, which I really think will be beneficial to you all and a model for some other places. But you also at some point need to get on with it. But storytelling is really, really important. The storytelling is as important as getting the new water solutions, the new water technology right, because you don't get to do the technology or the solution without people being along for the ride.
Thank you, Charles, and I would like to thank you again for a very interesting presentation and also accepting our invitation. There's still very interesting questions, but we're out of time. And those questions, you would be able to see them on the website. And I would like to thank everyone as well attending this session. And there will be very interesting sessions in the afternoon as well. Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.
Thank you so much.